today we're going to switch over to my friend Kent Keirsey from Universe, and the domain is Universe Software, but I just know them as Universe. And Kent is also the founder of Product 404. For those of you here in Atlanta, Product 404 is a local group of product managers who have a Slack community as well, and have in-person events a few times a year to get together and also really help people dive into a product management career. And they're very active in our universities around here and with mentorship programs to really help people establish themselves as product managers. And we want to welcome Kent today, who's going to talk about his experience in product engagement, some of the tools that he uses to really ensure great product engagement with his computers. Did I say Product 404 again? Kent founded Product 404, which was recently rebranded, renamed to Product ATL, because I guess they wanted it to be found more easily.
SEO. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Brett. I'm going to share my screen now and take over.
Yep.
You all tell me that you can see that, and we'll move on.
We got you.
Good. All right, cool. Hey, everybody. As Jason mentioned, my name is Kent. I will go through this in a very meandering, conversational way. So feel free to interrupt me if at all you have questions, or if I start to ramble on for too long about anything, because I do tend to do that. Pretty quickly, I'll just do a brief kind of recap of my background. I'll start from the bottom and work my way to the top. I started in consulting at EY, and I worked in their technology risk practice. I think that has shaped how I view product management. I was looking at it from a risk lens before I read Inspired. So looking at how products might fail and how we can avoid those situations. I tend to use that inversion framework very often in product thinking. But I found my way into the Atlanta startup scene, first at a MarTech company called Atomized. I left that for a GDPR privacy or data privacy group called OneTrust, which has since become a unicorn. I then went into Gather, which was a hospitality technology startup that was acquired by Vista Private Equity. Went to Greenlight, which is a fintech debit card for kids, is kind of the most well-known tagline. And then most recently have moved to a company called Universe Software, which I won't even begin to try to describe the business model of Universe Software. The long and short of it is we acquire companies and help them build their products. But in addition to that, I am also, as Jason mentioned, the leader of a group called Product ATL. And I'm just a big fan and nerd about product management. So I'm going to share a little bit of my thoughts as it comes to product and feature engagement. I will kind of preface it with the lens that I have lived and breathed SaaS. So look at it from the lens of kind of maintaining a consistent value stream to customers, because they're paying every month. You want to continue to deliver value to those customers every month. And the way that I typically look at software products is from more of like a product-led growth lens, in the sense that you try to push as much of the process onto the product itself. You don't rely on a sales team to get people in. You don't rely on an onboarding team to teach them how to use it. You have to let the product stand on its own in order to guide users from the point of, as we'll talk about in just a moment, discovery all the way to engagement. And so that's kind of the lens that I look at things through. That I would say typically is a very strong lens to look at any product. But I do think that it is particularly relevant for subscription products. So anyways, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. We want to keep this light and conversational. And as I mentioned, I do tend to ramble. So we'll start with value. And I like to break down value when I'm talking to my team about value, in the sense that there's kind of two elements of value. There's perceived value, and this is kind of that realm of product marketing before I've come through the door or before I've started to use a feature. What do I actually think I'm going to get by engaging with this thing? And so, when we think about perceived value, we ask questions like, do people actually have the problem we're solving for? Can we get them to see that this is the solution for them? Do they even know that they have the problem we're solving for? If we, are selling them something they do need, but they don't know they need it, they're still not going to buy it. And how do I get them to reconcile that? How do I get them to see that the product or feature that I have or that we're providing them actually solves their problem? And how do we clear that hurdle to get them to start using it? Because there's a lot of people who, will recognize a product as something that would solve something for them, but they still don't pull the trigger, right? They don't cross that threshold and actually start using it. And then we actually talk about, the value, traditional value, which is actual value. And it's the realm that us product managers live and breathe. And we ask questions like, is my product usable enough that they're going to get to the point where they can actually realize the value I promised them? So if, it takes 30 days of using a product to get to the point where they're like, oh yeah, this is great, this is actually doing the thing I want, can we actually get them through that 30-day journey to the point where they get value from the product we've shipped? The second one, does my product actually deliver on the expected or perceived value? If we sell them, something, sell them their dreams, but then only deliver a fraction of those, we're delivering some amount of value, but it's maybe not what they expected. And then have we done such a good job solving that problem that we are the habitual solution to that problem? And so this starts to get to kind of reactivation and continuous engagement, where a person starts to affiliate. People are probably familiar with jobs to be done as a framework. If you're not, jobs to be done is kind of like the foundation of how I think about product. But a very brief description of that would be we hire products in our daily lives to solve problems for us. So when when I need a coffee, the solution or the product I've hired is Starbucks, because they're constantly available. And when I think, oh, I need a cup of coffee and I'm on the go, my mind goes habitually to Starbucks because I know what I'm going to get. I know that I can get it quickly. And so I habitually use that. Similarly, when we're using software, if we have a problem, let's say I need to send an email, I need to check my calendar, even if, we've recently switched the email or calendar solution that we're using, because I know I've tried a bunch of different calendar solutions to try to get to the holy grail of I always know what's going on in my life. Unless it becomes a habitual use case where we constantly know where we're going and what we're doing, we tend to slip back into the old product or the old thing that we'd hired for. And so I like to think about all of these things when I think about value, because I think it's important when we understand engagement in the life cycle of discovering and deciding to use a new product. And so I'll start with features, kind of bottoms up, because I think as product managers, very often we're launching new features and not necessarily new end-to-end 0-to-1 products, although I will get to that as well. And so when we think about feature engagement, the context is these users are in a product that they've come to for a large, big problem, and we're trying to present them a solution to a smaller problem or a second order problem that they're going to start experiencing in the context of our product. And so when we think about adding a new feature, the real question is how many users are going to be aware that this feature even exists? Are we putting it, right on the homepage, big button in the nav bar? Very often our products don't, or our new features don't get that level of treatment. They're often, relegated to some settings menu deep in the tree of information architecture. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we make it so that users discover our feature in the natural course of them experiencing the problem that is going to be relevant to this specific solution? So when we talk about discovery, this is kind of the first step of the journey. How many users are aware that they have the problem and that this thing exists to solve it? So this is kind of a user experience or user journey type question. And an example here might be if they are navigating through a workflow and they have, kind of a problem that's associated with that workflow, are they able to learn more about a feature? Are they able to understand more about what it does? And specifically, when I think about feature engagement, I like to ask myself, how am I tracking and monitoring these steps in the journey? How are we instrumenting our product so that we actually have visibility into how many people are discovering this new feature, this new thing that we've brought to them? And so when I talk through this lens of feature engagement, I'm talking through the lens of what should our analytics be capturing? And in this case, discovery should be the first moment that a user should be aware that our feature exists. So in this case, if they go to that learn more screen, if they open the tooltip, if they land on a product marketing page that says, hey, there's this cool new feature, then we know that they have at least discovered it, that they're aware of the thing. And we can start to ask ourselves, why haven't they taken the next step, which would be activation? And so activation is really the first user intent where they say, oh, this thing sounds interesting. I want to learn, like start using it. They actually engage with the call to action that says start using this or get started, or is anything that kind of would be a good signal to us as product people that they are not just aware of the problem, but that they have the problem and are interested in solving it. So this would be the kind of first step on that engagement journey. So if there were a button on some photo page that said upload now, or if there was a core workflow that had a create button, that would be kind of the first signal that they're interested in getting started and are actively going to start using the feature. But it's very important that we recognize that's not valuable. It's not valuable that I hit the create button. It's not value that I hit upload now. That's the first step in the journey, but there's a lot of additional steps along the way. And those are what I like to call engagement milestones. The number of engagement milestones to get to value is going to vary depending on the length of the workflow that you have and just the time period that happens in. If this is a very short usage window, so something where I want to upload a photo, let's say as my avatar photo or something like that on a social website, those engagement milestones are probably pretty short and pretty tight. But if it's a 14-day journey, I'm booking some future event and I've got 14 days that I'm going to get reminders and I'm going to be made aware and my customer is going to be made aware of that thing, that engagement window is very long and those engagement milestones are going to be pretty spread out. But you want to understand where the users are going to go, whether it's just them or whether it's other users as well involved in that engagement journey. You want to understand each one of those and track every step along the way to understand how many people are getting through that funnel to value. And the last step of this, I'm going to skip this and come back to it. The last step is value realization. And I like to use this term to really describe the aha moment for a user. You often hear that as like the magic moment of your product. And value realization is really when a user says, oh, that's what I came for. That's what I'm really looking for. That's the problem that I had. I've received value from this. And an example that I really love to use for value realization to really kind of like hone in on this is Spotify. Most people are familiar with Spotify, and music in general, when you think about what the value is for Spotify, is just, oh, I have my favorite song on tap. But they have a specific feature, and that feature is the Discover playlist, right? And so that's kind of like, okay, it's our product or a feature that's tuned to a very specific problem. You want to discover new music. And so, a more junior product manager might say, okay, well, the thing I want to track is just how many people are listening to the Discover playlist every week, right? That's my golden metric. That's not really what people want. It's not just listening to the Discover playlist that is valuable to the user. And if we take a step back and we ask ourselves, what problem does this solve for the user? It's likely something like, the music I'm listening to now is great, but I want something new. I want to find my new favorite song. I want to be on the cutting edge. I want to hear something that's going to like resonate with me. And in that sense, if we're taking a very hard look at value and we're keeping the bar high, value realization isn't just I listened to the Discover playlist. Value realization is I just found my new favorite song. And so as product managers, we should be asking ourselves, how could we track that? How could we actually monitor that people are finding their favorite song using the Discover playlist? And instrumenting that would probably look like something, they heard the song for the first time on the Discover playlist. They added it to one of their own playlists or liked it, and they listened to it at least 3 to 5 times more after they listened to it on the Discover playlist. That is value realization. That's when we know we're doing our job of giving them their favorite song. And that's a high bar to hold ourselves to. And very often we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where it's like, oh, well, only 3% of our users are finding their favorite song. But if we ask ourselves what people really are using that product for, that's it. And that should be what we're working to improve. So that's an example of value realization. We'd be asking ourselves, how can we track steps along the way? So if we go back through this and we ask ourselves in that context what that looks like, discovery would be like user engaged with a question mark or tooltip around Discover playlist, or they landed on the page where the Discover playlist is presented to them and we feel like they probably have seen it. Activation would be they opened it up, maybe they didn't hit play. Play would be an engagement milestone. Maybe there's probably some metric of like how long they listen to or how many songs they listen to on the Discovery playlist. And we care about that. It's important that we understand how many people are engaging with the feature. But then we want to really make sure that we've got that value realization step that is a very, very high bar for us, and that we're tracking that to see how many people we're getting to that aha or magic moment. Now, I threw this lovely complicated graph into the slide deck because I like to talk about how we get people to activate and how we can get people to make their way through this engagement process. This is called the Fogg behavior model. BJ Fogg is this behavioral psychologist, but everyone in product loves this Fogg behavior model because it's relevant when we think about how can we influence our users to progress down that engagement milestone. How can we remind them of the value that they wanted at the end of that journey? And how can we get them to take each of these steps? So I'll break this down because it's a little bit of a complicated chart as it's presented, even though it's relatively simple from a graph perspective. On the left-hand side, on this y-axis, we have the motivation of the user. So this is really just like, is this something that the user is highly motivated to solve? Or is it just kind of like, sure, I guess I'll do it. Very, very low motivation. And then in the context of, the user being prompted to do it, are they extremely capable of doing it in that specific moment? So is it really easy for them to do? Are we making it easy for them to do? Or is it extremely difficult? Would it be like asking them to do a 30-minute survey while they're in the car, right? Is it very low capability, bad context, bad environment? And there's this line here called the action line. This isn't a science. This is more of like a finger in the wind type thing. But when you have very high motivation and very high ability, anytime you're prompted, you're going to be well above the action line, which is that green line. And those prompts are likely to succeed. If you have high motivation and high ability to do it, and you get a push notification that says, click this button and all your problems are going to be solved, it's that simple to do, I'm very likely to engage in that. Whereas if I have low motivation and low ability, there's almost zero chance I'm going to engage with anything that you push to me. And so you're kind of balancing these two axes. You might have situations where users are, moderate ability, and the question is, how can we make this super appealing to them? How can we make the product marketing or the positioning really, really compelling to get them to increase that innate motivation and get them to engage? Or how can we make it easier for them? So if motivation's pretty fixed, we've got the perfect product marketing messaging, it's positioned really well, we just have to get them further this way. How can we make it easier for people to activate and engage? And so this is really just useful when we think about each of these steps from activation through engagement milestones to that value realization, is how do we make it super easy for people to progress in this journey? How do we make each step something that is highly motivating or very easy to do? Because each of those is going to increase the number of people that get to our final step. So before I continue, I want to open up the floor if there's any questions. I don't know if Jason, if you see any in the chat that come in, interrupt me if you would. But if anyone wants to unmute and ask questions, I will take a second to give you guys one.
There was a question that came in the chat from Beverly that kind of related to a question that I had as well. And what Beverly asked is, what are some of the tools that you can use for product funneling? And I was also curious about what tools you're personally using as you're thinking about how you're tracking the analytics through here. So what are you using?
Yeah, it's great. A great question. There's a bunch of tools you can use. I mean, I've seen teams use very rudimentary setups to track things. At a very basic level, if an early stage startup, you don't have a lot of money, there are still tools you can use. But the tools I use, Mixpanel is what we're using for dashboarding for product managers. We actually implement a tool called Segment, and this is more from like a tech debt perspective. How do we make this scalable? How do we continually add event tracking in, and how do we make sure that data gets to where we need to have it? And Segment is basically kind of like you plug it in and have it track all of the events that you want, and it will pipe that data wherever you need it to go. So if you've got a tool that's like managing CRM communications, so like an Iterable or a Braze or any of those tools, HubSpot, Salesforce, if you've got anywhere where you're managing that data, you can have it piped there, as well as Mixpanel, as well as Snowflake if you've got a data warehouse. Segment is kind of the data pipeline tool. You implement it once and track all the events, and it will manage the routing to wherever you need it to go. So that's what we use for our event, kind of rigging it up, and it funnels into Mixpanel, which is where we then review it. I know that Greenlight uses that setup as well, helped implement it there. A fun tool if you're B2B and you don't have a lot of users, MTUs is typically how these tools are tracked. Or events, I guess I should say, is Amplitude is another well-known analytics tool. And John Cutler, if you're familiar with him, he works at Amplitude. They are a little bit of a different pricing scheme, and typically you find yourself between Mixpanel or Amplitude if you're considering options. Amplitude has a free version up to 10,000 or 10 million events, I think, 10 million events. And after that, you start paying, and it's just a huge step increase at that 10 million event mark. But if you have like not that many events, or you've got a small number of customers that are paying you a lot, and so you can really kind of like push that 10 million event world really far. At Gather, we never paid for Amplitude. We were on the free version all the way through the time I was there, because we just didn't have that many events. We had a small number of higher contract value customers. So Amplitude's a good way to track those. In any case, we could probably go down a rabbit hole on how to event things effectively and how to name things and so on and so forth. I won't get into that here, but if you use this framework and ask yourself the question of, do I have an event that I can use to track this step in the funnel? That will be a good way to go about creating that tracking plan, which is what you will then put into the analytics tool. So hopefully that answers the question. We see any others come in?
Yeah, we've had a couple of others come in. Let's see here. Allison asked if you could speak to and share an example around feature activation, around exposing subscription interests.
I guess I'll clarify the question. Exposing subscription interest. Are we talking about an activation step that would indicate the user's interested in upgrading to a paid product or subscribing to the product?
Or having options at a subscription level, so like a good, better, best, or premium, free, and elite, or something like that. The project I'm working on right now, we're kind of exploring like, what if we give folks several lanes? Do they even, like, right to your point, do they even want that? But like, how would we be able to expose that if it's not yet present?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this is actually a really good discovery technique as well, because what you're trying to do is you're basically creating, there's this test called the painted door. And if you haven't heard that, you're basically creating the illusion that this full engagement journey exists, but you're actually, the painted door itself is the activation, is like right behind the activation step. So the user says, oh, here's this thing. They tap a button that indicates they're interested, and they open the door into nothing, right? It's basically like a message that says, hey, we haven't launched this yet. You're on the waiting list. We'll tell you when it exists, right? And you'll see this used a lot in new product discovery. So a lot of if you see things launched on Product Hunt, a lot of them that are early stuff is basically just like, is anyone interested in this before we go build it? They're just waiting lists. And if you ever go to a very sexy product marketing site that then has you join a wait list, there's like a 75% chance that thing doesn't exist at all, and they haven't even started building it, because they're trying to measure what is the percent of people that activate? So it's a great question. Like how do we do that well? I've used the painted door on a marketing site before. So just kind of like get all of the top of funnel on our marketing site to see who's interested in this avenue. We recently did a test with one of our products where we operate a mobile product. It's mobile only today, but we were considering a web app version of the product. And so on our website, we just added a third option. You get started on the App Store, the Google Play Store, or start on your PC, right? Like open up in a web browser. And we actually measured the amount of people who went that route and said, oh, wow, there's a lot of people who are interested in a web version. So that kind of gave us interest. So where you place those activation points is really just kind of a question of like, where is it most natural for you to have a painted door in order to kind of track that? What I would typically do is like wherever the product or the feature is going to exist in the product and in the context of the user's experience. So if they're in, let's say you're asking yourself if you want to add a new paid upsell for a feature that already exists, but you want to add kind of like some new bells and whistles, you might pretend that the bells and whistles exist and kind of present some options for engagement on that page. And then when people click into that, tell them, we haven't, built it yet. It's going to be part of this product. And then eventually you can create the whole upsell journey from that point. So it depends on whether the product exists or not, whether you're doing a 0-to-1 product and you want more of like a marketing site approach, or if you are adding a new feature in the context of your existing product and you want to do some kind of testing there. But it's a great question.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that there are a lot of questions, but I will make sure that we get through the rest of the slide deck and then we'll come back around and answer some more.
Sounds good. And I do also want to let everybody know as we switch back over to you, Kent, I'll monitor the questions in the chat and we'll get back around to those as well, but you don't have to wait on me. You can also just throw your hand up using the reactions panel in the participants down at the bottom of your Zoom client, and you can ask your own question as well if you want to kind of jump on here too. So go ahead, Kent, and take it away. Take it back.
Absolutely. And feel free to interrupt if like something's super interesting, raise your hand and I'll stop and call you out. So when we talk about this journey, we've kind of gone through one loop, but this is really like, as I mentioned, I look at things from a subscription perspective, and we don't want people to just like do it once, because that's not enough to subscribe to a product. We want people to go around this merry-go-round of value. We want people to go around and around and around and keep doing that journey over and over again. And so I like to look at how people are doing this set of engagement milestones and loops over time. What does ongoing adoption look like? What is the pattern of ongoing adoption? So as I mentioned before, if this loop of value delivery is very short and constrained, so they can do it within, let's say, 3 minutes, and they have a routine need to do it. So, let's say, for example, you're a food tracking app, you're an app that people come in and they log their daily food. You would expect to see someone come in on a regular basis. You're typically going to be monitoring daily active users. How many people are coming in every day and actually tracking their food intake? If instead you're more like a booking solution, a business booking solution, and you are going to have someone come in maybe once every week or every 2 weeks and book something, then you're going to have this kind of like longer engagement cycle or this longer adoption window, and you're going to want to monitor those. And so you're probably looking at maybe weekly active users or monthly users. So you want to instrument and monitor the kind of enclosed or siloed loop of value, but you also want to monitor how that happens over time and track kind of like regular, use this as like a North Star metric, if you've heard of that, the number of people who get to value in a certain period of time and have that high bar of value delivery. And I am going to pause and ask Mr. Jason Brett if you can mute yourself, sir. I hear the clicker, the click clatter of typing. So as we think about like what features we have in our product and really what level of adoption we're seeing, it kind of helps us understand how important this feature is to our overall product. So this framework is really just, it's a finger in the wind. This doesn't say anything about the feature. It doesn't mean that things are important or like, it does help show that they're important, but it doesn't mean that a feature shouldn't be invested in further necessarily, but it helps us ask ourselves questions about what we should do with a specific feature. So core features, 70 to 90% of active user adoption typically means this is pretty core to the use case. It's probably fundamental to the product if that many people are using it. An ancillary feature is something that is probably more important to a specific segment of your user base. So you might have 3 user personas, and you've built an ancillary feature that is really, really important to one of those personas. It's part of why they bought the product, but it's certainly not like the majority use case for your product. Not everybody needs it. And you probably have kind of done some segmentation to say, we built this feature for this specific subsegment. So an example of that might be, let's say Calendly. Everyone's familiar with Calendly these days. They implemented a feature that allows you to take payments ahead of time for a meeting. And that's super relevant if you're using Calendly to, sell your services to somebody. But that's certainly not the common use case or the core feature of Calendly. The core feature is scheduling on my calendar. And a lot of people use it just for like managing the insanity of I need to book a meeting. But for those users that do want to take payments and they're using Calendly as the solution to book their time, well, certainly payments is important. So an ancillary doesn't mean it's not important to the users that use it. It just helps you think about who it's important for and whether that's important, for your product overall or just a specific subsegment. And then there's those lovely features that we all thought were going to be, everyone's favorite feature, and then have like 5% or less. And those I typically call an orphan feature. And it doesn't mean that it is something you should deprecate immediately, always, although orphan features are great candidates for deprecating. But if you are going to keep an orphan feature around, you better have a customer who's adopting that orphan. So you've probably got some of these features that maybe like one big enterprise customer uses. If you're in B2B, everyone knows that one customer who we built a feature for and we wouldn't keep it around, but they're paying us a lot of money to keep it around. They've adopted that orphan feature, right? Otherwise, if nobody wants to adopt it, well, do we want to keep paying for it, or do we want to take that feature away and maybe, make a few very small vocal customers angry, but overall won't affect the trajectory of our product? So understanding kind of the different levels of engagement and adoption help us understand how to make decisions about our product. But if something is orphaned and we think like, really it's because people haven't discovered it. It's not that it's not valuable. It's just that they aren't aware of it, or we haven't given them the opportunities to engage with it. The question is, how do we make an orphan feature like a drive awareness so that it can become the ancillary feature we know it can be, or the core feature we know it can be? The questions are, what do we do with this thing? Do we increase the level of engagement and adoption, or do we cut our losses and move on? And so when I think about a product overall, as I said, features ladder up into the overall product. I'm asking myself, when we get a new cohort of customers in, a new set of users that are coming into the product. And again, I mentioned cohorts because when you're managing a product that's more product led, you typically look at users as just like bundles of users that come through it over specific periods of time and have the same experience. And so you can kind of like monitor their different levels of engagement that way. I see how many people in that cohort, what is the mix, what is the segmentation of that? If it's consistent with previous cohorts, are they doing the same things? If it's a different mix, what is that influenced? Is the segment that is super interested in a feature, like an ancillary feature, has attracted new cohorts that are more attracted to that feature, and so engagement's going up for that? Are we shifting the mix of our user base? Trying to understand where people are going, what features they're engaging with after they register or sign up, or if they sign a contract and start using it. Where are they going in the product? How are they adopting certain features? And where in the life cycle are they engaging? Are we seeing consistent patterns of engagement? So if 90% of our customers do something on day one, but we've got this slice of customers that haven't engaged there yet, should we be prompting them to try to engage in that feature we know is super critical to the life cycle? Those are the types of questions that this type of framework can help you answer. And really, again, to recap, we've kind of got this journey of discovery, activation, engagement milestones, and value realization, and the ongoing adoption of that. And if we really look at it through that lens, we should be able to tell ourselves, A, who is our product attracting? Like, what is really interesting about it? Where do we need to focus our efforts? Whether it is working with our product marketing team to reposition an existing product that we know is valuable. So going back to that value breakdown, the actual value is there. We know it solves a customer problem, but they aren't aware that that thing solves their problem. You know, we haven't done a really good job of positioning it. It's not discoverable. It's deep in some settings menu. It's not easy to activate or turn on. There's a 20-step engagement process before they can get to value. And so it's really, really tedious. We need to shorten that. Those are the types of questions that can help us figure out what are we going to do about improving each of these steps in the process. And you know, overall, that framework is a really good lens to define what you're going to do from a product engagement perspective, so, or a product development perspective overall. So if you're building a new product, you're asking yourselves, how do I create a product that is able to take a user all the way through this journey? When I've launched new products to market, I try to make sure that I'm asking our UX team and our engineers, what are we doing to make sure that this is discoverable, right? Are people going to land on this page? And I'm going in and looking at analytics. I'm looking at the page where we're putting the only button you're going to ever find out about this feature. And if 3% of our user base goes to the page, that's probably the top of the funnel, right? That's the max adoption I'm going to see if that's the only button you're going to discover this feature with. So you have to present and create landing pages or like discovery experiences so that you're exposing the product or the feature to the users and giving them a chance to activate. We had a feature at Greenlight, and you'll probably see this in the marketing, parent paid interest, right? You can pay your kids interest on their allowance or the savings of their allowance. But the engagement lifecycle of that in the old UI was buried deep, deep, deep in a bunch of settings. And so people never really discovered it. The adoption was really low as a result. And so in the revamp of the UX, we elevated the positioning of that. There was a whole space where you could see the features. It kind of had a call out. More people landed on the page, and therefore the top of the funnel for discovery was there. And we could actually really measure how many people are interested in this, how many people actually activate and go through the process of setting it up. Because you're setting yourselves up for failure if you've got a really great product and you've honed all the engagement milestones and the actual product piece of it, but you haven't created a path to using that in the product. You haven't created a place for them to discover it or a place for them to activate it. So that brings me to like information architecture. And this is kind of like one of the things that I think is very much in the UX domain, but we as product managers should be looking at this as like our strategic battle map of when we're launching a feature, this is where we're placing it into, is this very complex information architecture. And this is kind of an idealized sitemap-esque view of the information architecture of your app. You've got your main dashboard and maybe the few key nav areas that you then dig deep into. And so this main dashboard has a few key areas that are very highlighted. And then if you dig in, you can kind of find those things very deep down into it. At best, your new users are going to see this. And I say at best because more often than not, there's one feature that stands out to them. They're like, this is what I came for. This is the thing that really matters to me. And they don't even look at anything else but that thing. And there's this like early part of a new user's experience where they are prone to discovery. And what I saw when I launched a new feature at Greenlight, we saw this pattern in the data. The first 14 days of a user's experience were when they were going to really be primed for discovery. If there was a feature that was going to get them to engage, they needed to find it in that first 14 days, because after that, they are in habitual mode. They are in routine. They go into the product to do one thing. They found what job this product does for them, and they'll continue to use it for that, but they're not really looking around and playing around with features and diving deep into menus. They're going to solve the problem that they came to solve. And so you have to really think about, when is a user primed to start that discovery process? And can we get them to it? If we're adding a new feature, can we get existing users to take a break from the very like beeline to value that they're coming into the product for, to say, oh, what's this new thing? what's this new button? What's this new feature? And you'll see like products do this really well. They'll put like a new banner, or they'll create some kind of like eye-catching confetti or something like that when a new feature is existing on the dashboard, so that people are drawn to it and they're like, oh, that's different. Wonder what that is. And that's why they do it. We want to avoid this at all costs, this information architecture where you get presented into an app, you land on it, and it's basically like, welcome to nowhere. We give you no context, and we hit them with tooltips that are irrelevant to them. Click here to learn about this thing that's irrelevant. This other button doesn't seem cool. Hey, did you know something that you don't care about? We would throw them onto an empty page with zero context and a button that's a plus sign. When you land in those experiences, it feels terrible because you're not given any context to even engage or discover with the product. You don't have any product marketing or positioning or let me guide you through this journey. These types of information architectures typically fail because they aren't getting users to value. There is zero map to land on. When we add a new feature to our information architecture, we're asking questions of where this is going to live. Is this going to be a new nav bar icon? Is this going to be very deep down in some like settings page? And where we place the new feature gives us a lot of kind of indication of how likely it is to succeed. Are people going to discover it? And if people aren't discovering it, are they going to activate it? If they're not activating it, do we get them value, right? So I very often have seen teams launch some really, really critical feature that people are asking for. And you can like look at their reviews online or in the app stores, and the reviews keep asking for the feature after they've launched it. They're like, hey, I wish you guys did this thing. You launched it 2 months ago, right? And the product manager is pulling out their hair because they are like, we did it. We already launched the thing that solves this problem. But if you placed it in some configuration menu that you only go to once in a blue moon, and that's the only thing you did, you just launched it, well, of course, no one's going to find out about it. They're not going to the settings menu every time they want to figure out if the feature exists. They went there once when they started the product, they continued using it, and they just have the problem over and over, but they don't know the solution exists. So it's important to ask ourselves, if we do put it deep into the settings page, somewhere deep in there, how are we letting users discover that? And you can do that a couple of different ways. You can create kind of like the notification experience on the main dashboard where you're like, hey, we think it might be relevant for you. We throw a modal up that says, you know, you've had this problem in the past. Why don't you go here to solve it? Or in the context of using other areas of the product, if it is relevant to remind users or notify users that it exists, you might put a nav link or kind of like a small learn more tooltip or something that just showcases that the solution exists if they want it. It's not, you know, a big confetti launch, but it is contextual to where they might experience the problem. You want to give them a heads up that that solution exists and will navigate them right to the point where they can engage with it. And again, this goes back to the behavior model, which is if we make it really easy for people to come from this context into the settings page, make the change and come back, then they are more likely to do it than if we just tell them, hey, we send them an email about the launch and we say, hey, if you go to settings the next time you're in the app and you go to this deep menu, then you'll find it. Well, the person's going to either A, forget about it when they get that email, if you're not making it super clear and deep linking directly to that part of the app, or they're just not going to want to do it because it sounds like a pain in the ass and they don't want to go through that experience, right? So these are different ways that you can kind of like make it easier and diminish the amount of work it takes to get to that process. Lastly, I like to talk about kind of engagement velocity and time to value. We talked about like this, you know, if it's a very tight loop and you can do it in, you know, 3 steps, that's a lot better than if you make it a 20-step process that they have to go through. You can ask yourselves questions when you're developing the product, like, how can we reduce the number of steps it takes to get to the end of this journey? How can we make it so that people get to value sooner? An example of this, when people are signing up for a fintech product, you very often are going to be asked a series of very personal probing questions. This is called the KYC process. And if you've ever signed up for anything that's product-led fintech, it's like, what's your social security number? What's the street you lived on when you were a kid? What's your favorite, you know, color. It's stuff that's just like random stuff that's going to help them decide whether they want to give you an account. There are solutions out there. This is kind of like in the creepy area, but there are solutions where if you've got a single data point, you can get all of the other answers. You can actually get a person's social security number without having the full social security number. There are solutions out there for it. But in the context of making things easier for your customers, if you want to reduce the number of steps, you can pre-populate as much of the information you already have. So rather than having them fill out a form a second or third time when you already have the data, or you can get the data, you can maybe pull together all of the data that you've got in your database, pre-populate those fields, or you can engage with a vendor that gives you those fields and shares that those data points and pre-populate them for the user that way. However, you can reduce steps to get the person to the account, which is what they really care about. They don't care about filling out forms. That's going to help you improve time to value. And time to value, which is really, really important in product-led products, is the moment a user signs up for your product, how quickly are they getting to that aha moment? So if they came to Spotify to discover new music, how quickly are you able to get them new music that they actually like and that they favorite and that they add to their playlist and that they repeatedly play over and over again? And reducing the number of steps or improving the rate of individual steps along the way by making it either easier, more clear, or less frictionally. Right? I don't think that's a word. More frictiony, I guess, something like that. That will improve the rate of completion and get people along that journey. I won't dive deep into this because I know people probably have questions, so I'll just skip that and go directly to questions. Jason, you want to read out the questions that we've got?
Yeah, we've got quite a few in here. Okay. So, and I would also encourage folks, if you have a question that we haven't gotten to yet, seriously, do throw your hand up in there. This is not the Jason and Kent show. This is a group event, so join in the conversation. But I did have a question from Jerry, kind of towards the end here, is asking about gamification and how or do you use gamification in that new features discovery process, or are there some things that you've used really successfully versus things you've tried that were not successful?
Yeah, gamification is a really interesting concept. I hate the term gamification because I think it makes everything sound like some kiddie game that you need to put badges and achievements towards.
Me too.
Yeah, gamification is as a concept is incredibly important, but I think it's really tied more to how do we associate value to completing certain steps? How do we incentivize? My background's in economics, and so when you think about it from that lens, you're tying utility to some of these actions. When you gamify something, it's not that you have like hacked the human brain, it's that you have like found something that is giving a user value, even though it's non-traditional utility value. I like to break products down into 4 different types of value. There's productivity value, which is going to be something that it's kind of like it solves a problem for you. I mow the lawn, I need a lawnmower, that's productivity value. I need a CRM solution to keep track of my customers, that's productivity value. There's transactional value, which is going to be you facilitate some transaction. Uber is a great example of this. Before Uber, I couldn't just hop in a random person's car. Now I can, thank you, Uber. So Uber is a transactional value stream. They allow certain transactions or facilitate certain transactions. Amazon is a good example of that as well. They make it super easy for me to buy things. There's attentional value, which is I want to pay attention to this thing. It's entertaining to me. I want to give it my attention. Facebook is a great example of those. Typically with attentional value streams, you're monetizing that by either charging a content subscription, a Netflix, for example, or you're selling it to advertisers, right? You're selling that attention space, those eyeballs to advertisers. And then the last one, which is where gamification typically plays in, is status value, status-based value. You're kind of giving identity value to the person, and the person is either getting something that they value personally. It makes them feel like they have accomplished something. So a trophy, achievement, so on and so forth. Those have to matter to the user. They have to care about that achievement or that badge. Adding badges to something doesn't make it inherently more engaging, But if those badges are then something that they're excited to share on their LinkedIn profile, well, that thing has status value now. And so that achievement actually matters. To answer the question though, yes, if you can find something that would actually be valuable to your user base. So if you create an incentive for the user to continue on that journey, and there's something tied to the end of it, they will do it if it's valuable to them. But the important piece to ask yourself is, do I have something, or can I create something that is going to actually be valuable to the user? Because otherwise you're just adding like points and badges that don't matter to the user, are irrelevant, and actually probably subtract value in the net from in the user's mind from your product. But I think it's important to definitely like think about ways that you can engage the user, and typically gamification is going to be on that motivation ability graph, is going to be increasing the motivation. You're incentivizing users to go through and do this thing. A great way to think about this as well, Dropbox, like product-led growth and growth hacking and things like that are really good examples of this as well. Dropbox, when they wanted to incentivize people to share Dropbox with their friends, I remember this because I use this a lot. You got a gigabyte for free with Dropbox before you paid for it. And you could pay for it to unlock more space, or you got a full extra gigabyte if you shared Dropbox with a friend that then signed up and used Dropbox. So it was like, holy moly, I get a whole gigabyte of space. That's doubling my space if I ask my friends to join. That increased the motivation and definitely made people share, which can go into great detail about how that boosted Dropbox's business and made them what they are. But that was tying actual value to a behavior that you wanted the users to engage in, that they would otherwise be very low motivation on. You've increased it by gamifying, but really is just tying value to the behavior. So the answer is yes, you could. It's awesome. You should do it. But don't call it gamification.
No.
Call it incentivization. I think
I don't like that term either.
Yeah. You and I are on the same page, Jerry.
It's just the one that everyone uses, so I have to use it.
It is. But I agree. I think it's incredibly important. And those are great ways that you can ask yourself, how can I increase the motivation from one step to the next in this engagement journey? Adding incentives, whether they are actual incentives, value incentives, like a productivity or transactional value, or if they're status-based value, but they actually have to be valuable. You can't just throw stuff in there that, oh, I think it's valuable, but nobody does. So anyways, I'll stop there and see if we've got other questions. So I imagine we are close to the end.
We're getting close to the end here, but I think I've got a quick one. I saw a hand up, but it went down. So I'm going to switch over. Had a question about the correlation of value realization and the North Star framework. From Gordon a minute ago. Are they the same thing? What are the differences? How do they overlap, or what functions do they serve differently?
I mean, I think the North Star metric is really boiling up that concept of value realization to the product as a whole. So what is this? What do people buy this product for? What job does it do? And all of the features that you have probably have their own version of like a mini North Star for that feature. There's something that matters that you can measure for that. But overall, people come to our product for what? What is the big thing that they want from us? For example, I love Amplitude. So Amplitude is actually the North Star metric, or they did the North Star framework like workshop, and John Cutler promoted it. But I love their example of their overall North Star, which is weekly learning users. So basically they say, our value window or engagement lifecycle is probably within the 1 week period. It's not like we don't need people in the app every day, but we need people to come on a pretty regular basis every week. So it's weekly. And so they've kind of defined that engagement window there. And learning users is not just people who come in, they're not just using vanity metrics of somebody loaded up Amplitude. A learning user is someone who comes in, creates a new report, and then shares that with at least one other Amplitude user. That is the high bar they have set, is somebody comes in, finds a new insight, and it's so insightful that they have to share it with somebody. It's not just they're keeping it to themselves. I've learned something and I have to get it out to the organization, because that means we've actually, as a whole, learned something that's important and useful. So it's a very high bar, and that is their North Star metric. But it all maps back to this like journey of how are we getting people to value? And that is where the value is when I found something so insightful, I have to share it. So I think that value realization, you have to make that North Star metric tied to that value realization moment. But the North Star metric for your product has to be so important that your product revolves around it. It is a core feature. It is not one of these ancillary features, and it's something that is pivotal to your overall product strategy. If you're doing your product strategy right, this thing goes up, and your product strategy is revolved around this number going up. This matters to our product, not just, you know, to the feature as an individual value loop, but overall our company and our product are revolved around making that number go up. That is the bar that the North Star metric has to be held to, but it is very much a value realization step. That is where you're kind of looking for inspiration to set that high bar for the North Star.
So thanks so much, Kent. This has been a fantastic session. We were engaged right up here until the very end. I know a lot of people have to drop.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Kent.
you,
It's great to have you.
Awesome.